Hi, welcome to Long Lost Friends. I'm Elizabeth Eve King.
And I'm Andrea Goyan.
Today, we are excited to once again be talking to award-winning writer, actor, and filmmaker Koushik. Koushik was born and raised in India, has a PhD in human genetics, is known for his roles in Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, The Story of God with Morgan Freeman, and many more. His short film, Junk DNA, that he wrote, starred in, and produced won a prestigious Remy Award, and he's currently busy writing a full-length curry western that he will be starring in. He's also a long practitioner of yoga and has been teaching for many years. Welcome, Koushik.
Welcome, Koushik, or should we say Dr. Koushik?
Oh,
because it really would be Dr. Koushik, right?
Thank you so much for the awesome introduction, Elizabeth. Thank you, Andrea. Don't call me doctor. You can just call me Koushik.
Okay. No, not Dr. Koushik, but Dr. Koushik, because you have all this amazing science information that you can use in writing your comedy and fiction. How do you integrate that? How do you use your science when writing fiction?
That's a very interesting question. So after I finished my PhD, I worked as a scientist for about 5 years continuously before I fully moved on to becoming a filmmaker. So all those, my master's, PhD, and my actual, scientist work years, that's a bulk of my life, bulk of my career. So those feelings and thoughts will always be with me. And those studies and, writing articles and reading different articles, presenting my data in scientific conferences. So that was my life at that time. So I can never take that out of me. So for me, it's much easier to write a science-based fiction, which you can call a scientific fiction, sci-fi, because a lot of from my own life. And that's how I wrote Junk DNA. And if you just see the name, Junk DNA is directly linked with what I did, human genetics. Excuse me. And linking real science with fiction is not that difficult if you know the real science well. The concept in the Junk DNA was that in our human body, there is I think, almost 99% of our DNA is generally called junk. There is only 1% that's meaningful DNA. When you say meaningful means they code for proteins. Okay, only 1% of our DNA are called genes because they code for proteins. Proteins are the one that regulate all our human activities. Okay, but the 99% of our DNA don't code for any proteins, or we don't know of. Science doesn't know yet. Okay, what are we going to know in future? We don't know. But as of now, we see that 99% of our human DNA as junk. So in my film, the concept was that this scientist who by encounter finds out that this junk DNA actually has a very good meaning. Okay, they do code for something which was hitherto unknown, and he finds out that if you can manipulate the amount of junk DNA, you can actually manipulate how a person is artistic and non-artistic. Because again, coming from that background, science background, which is a very straightforward, you think like science, everything is analytical, everything is, you analyze it, you do the experiment, you prove it. Art is exactly opposite. Art is what is coming in your head, what you are creating from nowhere, imagination, right? So scientists and the artistic world are two completely different worlds. And in my comedy short, what I tried to show, the scientists boring people who have no understanding of comedy or art. And if you manipulate the junk DNA, they go on the other spectrum. They suddenly become artistic, but in a weird way, because their brains are scientists still. So as they start behaving artistic, they are behaving more weird. They're not normal artistic people. And that's where the comedy comes from. So that's what I tried to create in Junk DNA. And you can see the link in the bottom.
So actually, you made me think of another, and I'm not a scientist, so I could be wrong, but I'm going to have my own disagreement in that I sort of feel like science and art are the same, in that as an artist, I say, I see something in my head and I want to prove it by putting it on paper. So it's sort of the same, whereas a scientist has an idea and then they have to prove it in a different way. They sort of feel to me so similar. So it's interesting that
Andrea, I would absolutely agree with you. This is just like a concept I told you, and a concept of my film, but many times I feel exactly same as you just explained.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's similarities that they're there. What do you think, Elizabeth?
I agree with you, because I have obviously arts, theater, all that kind of background, but I also have some science background. I've worked in mostly more biology, but I find it's because it's often just sort of objectively looking at something. And you have to do that when you do art, I think. And also, comedy, what's funny, but still there's that truth behind it. Otherwise, it's not funny, it's not relevant. It's not, so it's sort of like you're an objective observer. I think they're like, people always think how can you do art and science? And I was like, I think they're really similar.
They're similar, but I get why you were going the way you did with your film. That's really funny to think of them being so analytical and then suddenly
because I had to take the two extremes of those two streams. Yeah. But there are a lot that would be right over here, which are very close to. I took the two extremes of those two sides.
And I love the junk DNA idea. I think that's so fun. Like, there's worlds to discover there. There's so much. I wrote it down. I'm like, oh, there's a story there. Now you've already told one, but there's other stories there. There's so many in that.
Oh yeah.
And my very next feature film script that I wrote is also based on real science. It's called Eugenies Jeans. I actually wrote that for a contest, and I will be submitting my script for the contest. And it's again based on real science. That okay, I completely forgot about my own script.
That happens. I sometimes look at titles of old stories and think, what the hell story was that? I have to go back and find it because I don't remember.
Do you know that Cancer Institute in New York City, Kettle? Oh my God!
Ketterman?
Yes.
Stones?
No, not Kettering Stone. No.
Oh, but one of those. That's okay. We'll put a link below. Just kidding. Okay. We won't.
But yeah, no, it's just for that. It's for that contest. But hold on, let me think of what the script is about, which is almost finished, and I completely blanked out on my own script.
When you remember, jump back in with it.
Okay.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my very next script, very next feature film script that I wrote, Eugenies Jeans, is also based on, in a way, real science, but again, little bit, on the fiction side. It's about a crime gene. Do we have crime genes? There had been some research on that, but no. This kind of behavioral activities are complex. They're not they're not straightforward. They're not like a Down syndrome where you can find, that there is one gene responsible. It's not a genetic disorder. It's a complex behavioral syndrome that is cannot be identified with one simple gene. Okay, and trying to do that is also not right. These complex behavioral patterns are not identified with only one simple gene, rather a combination of genetic and environmental factors. And trying to simplify them with just one simple gene is also not right. You cannot say that, okay, this is the gene that's responsible for crime. If you have that gene, you could be a criminal. If you don't have that gene, you are completely clear. No, it's not that simple. Or you cannot commit a crime and then say that it's not me, it's my genes that made me do it. Absolutely not. That's never going to work. So in this film, what I tried to show is that a scientist that comes up with who is researching on trying to find a crime gene gets involved in a set of activities and falls in love with a lady who is accused of a crime but did not actually commit the crime. Actually realizes that what he's trying to find out in the research is not that straightforward. He's trying to find that crime gene, and he thinks finding that will make him instantly famous and he's going to have a big career. But he realizes that is absolutely not possible, and trying to do that is like also trying to steer science towards naming something as crime gene, which gives it a sensational name, is absolutely wrong. Because of the activities he gets involved, and he realizes that there are several times when somebody could be accused of a crime and the society looks at him as a criminal, but the person actually did not commit the crime because he falls in love with a accused criminal.
So I want to ask you then, so basically then you are enjoying taking your breadth of knowledge and skewing it into fiction. So taking a little kernel of it and letting your imagination take that kernel to the what if, and then writing about it in a science fiction type of way.
That is exactly right. I mean, I'm not only enjoying that, I see that kind of a very specialized skill that only I have. And I think that, I also bank on my skill set because, generally life and Hollywood industry is very, they're focused on skilled people who have one particular talent. And I want to be known as the guy who merges, medical science and fiction, because I come from that background.
And you also you're also coming from India. So you're bringing a whole other spectrum of information and viewpoint to your fiction, which is really interesting.
Absolutely right. Many of the times, all my scripts have some Indian component in them. Either the lead character is Indian or there is a very strong supportive Indian character or things like that, or mixing between Indian and American culture. I love doing that because I think just creating one cultural aspect is not interesting enough. The interest is how an Indian culture is interacting with the West. That's where we find the interest, and how they are still, living peacefully with the mixing of culture. And that's what I believe America represents. This is a melting pot of every single culture in the world.
Ideally,
and how all these cultural people come to America and they become a part of the mainstream America and American life. That really interests me, that intrigues me. So writing about that also makes me very, happy.
Oh, so is this so much?
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just curious, the criminal gene, which I like that so much, that idea is great. And in fact, we're even simple things like eye color isn't necessarily just one little, it's more complicated. So
absolutely right.
Obviously criminals would be, but was that a full-length feature or is that a short?
That's a full-length feature film, yes.
Is that your first full-length?
That is my second full-length feature film. My very first one is called Operation Naked Yogi. that has nothing to do with science. That is with my yoga background, because I had been involved with yoga since I was like, I think 10 years old or something, and I had been teaching yoga for almost 15 years now. So that comes from my yoga background, and that is actually from a play. The play is called The Naked Yogi. I performed the play here in Los Angeles, and then I turned the play into a feature film script, a comedy feature. And that was my very first one. And the very next one is Eugenies Jeans, that is with my science background.
Now, I know you're going to
curry western. Then there will be
right. My curry western is the third one.
Yes.
That I'm writing.
Does that use any science, or is that just more cultural?
That is completely cultural. That has nothing to do with science or yoga. That's pure mixing of two different cultures: extreme Indian culture and extreme Western culture.
I don't know, Koushik. I think you're missing yoga on a horse.
Oh my God! Right, a guy doing yoga that's a great idea, Andrea. I might want to use it in my film, and I will give you a credit for that,
That would be great in a curry western. I can visualize it so well,
Or let me tell you, because my hero, he does not ride a cow because he's a cowboy. He rides a cow.
Oh, okay. Oh, even better.
And he comes from India. So in India, we worship our cows.
Mm-hmm.
So he worships his cow, and he rides on a cow because his idea in his brain is cowboy, somebody who rides on a cow. So maybe he does yoga on a cow.
On a cow, or you see those people who do yoga like with their dogs. So it could be yoga with the cow too.
With the cow, wow.
Or goats. I've seen people doing goat yoga.
People doing goat yoga, yeah, right.
Yeah, so yoga and a cow doing yoga. I want to see this.
Yes.
Now, do you have your script finished for that, or can you still add in little cow yoga scenes?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's not fully finished. I'm almost at the last phase of it, but it's not fully finished yet. I can absolutely add some cow yoga in it.
And are they ever really finished before they're filmed? Not really, completely.
Right.
Yeah, you get a finished thing, but then someone's got to mess with it along the way.
Yeah.
So
at least if you have the first fully finished draft, then you can start whatever you want to start with. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you sometimes take your science and it gives you that idea and you run with it, and sometimes you're using the culture and you're running with that. Should we ask you how you get your ideas? It's a noxious question. I never like it when people ask me, so why don't I ask you?
I mean, the science comes very naturally because I spent so many years in research, and my first short film, Junk DNA, which you can see, the link is right at the bottom, is completely science-based. So my very natural progression from a short film to a feature film was writing a feature which is science-based. Because as I would be going out to different producers and investors with my script, so I can make the feature film, I can show them Junk DNA, which is a fully produced short film that has won awards in good film festivals, that take a look at my 10 short film. Okay. It's not exactly same concept, but that's what I can create. That's what I created with my science background. And if you like that, let's take a look at my feature film script, Eugenies Jeans. So that's how, science came very naturally to me because of my past. And also I have the PhD title, which will stay with me forever. It's very easy for me to talk to somebody and tell them about my science background and stuff. But yeah, you were right that my cultural background, which is completely integrated inside me, the moment you look at me, I'm an Indian guy from India. I have an Indian accent. So that is completely with me. I don't even have to tell somebody about that. but I can simply tell them that here is a script I have, which is an interaction between Indian culture and Western culture, and how an Indian guy falls in love with an American woman, and how they figure out the logistics, and how with all the differences and fightings, they still find love. That's what my film is about, which would be the curry western that I'm writing right now.
Great.
So
Yeah,
I think all these things come pretty naturally to me because just who I am.
And I have a question that you and Elizabeth can address probably, but you may not, either one of you want to or be able to. That is, if you're not a scientist like both of you are, if you don't have an education in that, but you want to write science fiction, do you have any suggestions?
Well, yeah, my first suggestion would be the person must have a strong interest in science. Okay, if you have a strong interest in science, nobody should do or write anything without interest, right? That comes very first thing. So if you are writing a science fiction, and if it's a space science, I'm assuming you have a very strong interest in the space science. If you do, then the next thing is not watching a bunch of films, because films are a very fictional version of the real science. You need to know real science. How do you do that? By reading books, by reading articles, by doing your own research. You need to know what the real science is. If you know the real thing, then as a writer, you have a imaginary, fictional mind, and then you can create that world that merges science and fiction. But if you only know the fiction world, no understanding of the real science, then what you will be creating will go even farther away from real science and will go into a weird level. And anybody reading that or, reading the synopsis will immediately catch it that, something is off. It's not sounding exactly right,
That's a great suggestion. Yeah.
And I also think that, there's hard science fiction, right? And if you're writing hard science, usually for some reason, oddly enough, like you could use, I guess, genetics, but certainly biology, whereas somehow I think hard science fiction usually deals more with technology, spaceships, and that kind of thing.
Right.
And so you definitely wouldn't want to try and write hard science fiction unless you have some real, because you're going to get readers who have that background who are going to say, this is stupid, this is, and you get those readers even when your science is pretty good, because you always get these guys who's like, well, I think this, couldn't have blah, blah, blah. So, but you can say, wow, I really like this idea that sort of comes from science, and you don't touch that much on the actual science of it. It's peripheral to the story, maybe.
That's a very interesting point, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that tends to be how I write, because I dabble, I read, I do that, but I don't have the hard science facts to back it up. So I am very generalized, and mine's a what if, but.
And I also think that generally, if you reach out, whether it's to scientists, since we're talking, but I know I wrote a detective story, and I called a police station and said, hey, it was a Hollywood police station where I wanted my interrogation to take. And I was like, well, what about this and this and this? And he was really nice. Most people want to talk about what they do. They want to share their knowledge. It's so you can approach a science guy and say, I have some, in fact, and I did that once on a thing where it had to do with light year calculation. And I was like, I had the idea, but I was like, oh, I don't know.
Very quickly, Elizabeth, what you mentioned is a very interesting point. If somebody is writing something with hard science, it's kind of a different ball game. I generally try not to write that, because hard, like I generally write comedy. So with hard science and comedy, they don't go hand in hand. It's completely different. Hard science would be something like, like maybe you would have to write a drama on that. But I mean, there is not too much scope of fiction in that. Okay. Now, what I wanted to mention is that Eugenies Jeans is actually based on hard science. Why? Because I'll be putting that for a contest, script writing contest. Not script writing, it's a production contest, I think. It's run by Sloan Kettering Institute in New York City. They are very big on cancer research and stuff. So one of the requirement for that is you need to write a script based on science, where the science cannot be fabricated. The actual science cannot be fiction. Everything else could be fiction. The science cannot be fiction. So junk DNA does not fit there. I'm trying to show that these guys found like if you can manipulate the junk DNA, you change the person. That's not real science. That does not happen. So a script like that will not make it there. In the Eugenies Jeans, I have not changed a bit of the science. The science stays exactly as it is. Everything else changes. The people trying to follow that, those are the fiction things. But the real science, people are talking about, or they're doing the research, is what the real science is. And I had to do a lot of research on that. I had to read actual scientific articles on criminal genes, what people have found, the actual names of the genes, where they're located in our chromosome. I had to do some research. I had to note down all of those things. And then when I was writing, I made sure that there is no fabrication on the real science, because if they ask me questions, I should be able to answer them. So that's one very interesting.
And because you are Dr. Koushik, you can answer them.
I can answer them because I have already done a lot of research, and I understand when I read an article, I understand that because that's my past. If you don't have that background, then again, it's going to be very challenging for you to even understand those things.
But that is, I mean, Elizabeth, what you brought up about, reaching out to people who are professionals or in those occupations. And even when I've had people read, like I've done some short detective things or police-based procedural kind of things. And I have a couple of people I, send it out to who are in that department, and they'll be like, oh, no. That is not how it's done. And you're right. And Koushik, you go, but every TV show I've ever seen does it that way. They're like, and we all hate them for that, so it is, got to do your research.
Absolutely. Every time I saw anything about genes and cloning, I'm like, cloning, we are not even close to cloning a human being. It's like completely absurd. And then there'll be a movie where they will clone a human being in like 5 days.
And they'll be fully mature, right? They'll be an adult.
Fully mature, right?
Artificial intelligence. It's like suddenly there I am at my age. It's just it's so funny.
Even if you create a small baby, maybe a cloned baby, the baby to grow up will take how many, 20 years?
Right, exactly. And my understanding, you get to fix this for my brain, is that even if you clone, like if you clone an animal, if I have a favorite animal, there is no guarantee it's going to look like that animal, be like that animal. You can clone it, but it won't be the same animal at all.
I think you are right. Yeah, like genetically, I think animal cloning is probably possible, and it has been done. Genetic cloning of an actual animal, but I don't know how you determine the look of an animal. I don't know if you can tell.
I don't think if you have like a calico cat that it's going to have the same spots in the same places or the same personality. I mean,
the personality can be really different. There have been a few cases where, I think there's one where this guy, he somehow, I don't know exactly if it was cloning, but it was the same genetic material to make this cow that he loved. Actually, I think This American Life did a thing on it, and the cow turns out to like be very violent.
And look at this. I mean, I'll give you an example. A lot of these type of studies, like actual scientific studies, the scientists, they study twins. Twins are the perfect genetic models, okay, for them to study and figure out what are the differences. And I'm sure all of us, if we know any twins, we know for sure that the twins don't behave the same way. Why? Because your behaviors are influenced by the external factors. How you grow up, how your interaction is with the society, with you have interacted with a teacher or another human being that your twin has not. And she has interacted with some other people that you have not. So even monozygotic twins behave differently. They might look exactly same, they have the exact same genetic material inside, but they are behaving differently. So that's right there, it says.
Yeah.
Right. Well, do you use, like, especially in the Eugenies Jeans, epigenetics in terms of, because that's what.
No, I have not used epigenetic in Eugenies Jeans. It's just straightforward, trying to find a gene from the human chromosome. Yeah.
And have people tried to find an actual criminal gene, or?
Yeah, in this script, the scientist is working on trying to find a criminal gene. And yes, you are right. There are researchers who are working on criminal genes, and there are scientific articles available that you can read about. People have worked on trying to link crime with gene. Like they will do a case.
Yeah, weren't they even doing that? I mean, I remember like back in the 80s or 90s, them talking about, was it like if you had an extra like an extra Y or an extra X chromosome, I don't remember which way it was, you were more likely, like they looked at a bunch of serial killers and saw that they had a different chromosome than, and I don't know if that's the same, but.
Yeah, I don't know if different chromosome, but I think that's the type of studies these scientists will do. They will have a case control study. So they will take a bunch of criminals from, a record or something. Let's say they will check 100 criminals, okay? And then they will take 100 randomly selected individuals who have no criminal past. And then they will try to, many times you do targeted genetic approach. So you from your reading of the literature, from your research, you understand that the crime is linked to this behavioral path, which is influenced by this protein. That pathway, chemical pathway, is influenced by this particular protein. That protein is coded by these 4 genes. Okay, so that's called targeted approach. You are only looking for these 4 genes among those cases and controls. So you are doing a screening for those 4 genes if there is any variation of those 4 genes among these cases and the controls. And if you see any significant difference, that's your finding. I'm like, oh, wow, look, that gene A is more expressed in the cases and less expressed among controls. Or the gene A has one particular mutation in this position that the cases, majority of the cases, controls don't. That's called case control approach. There is also a gene-wide approach that is more time-consuming, more expensive, and a little more popular of late, since right now we know our entire genetic map of a human body. It has already been published. So among the cases and the controls, if you run the entire human genes and do a screening and try to find what are the differences between the cases and the controls, and then maybe you come up with a bunch of genes that have mutations or that are differently expressed among the cases and the controls. But that could range a huge number. That could be 50 to 100 genes.
Yeah, that's
And then the
fascinating.
next level of research would be narrowing down from 100 to a few, but like these are long-term studies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much, so interesting how to use science with, I mean, science is fascinating. It's
Yeah, science, that side of science, that's like hardcore, real, medical research science. That is a complete different beast on its own.
But you can take that to fiction, huh?
Right.
So.
Well, I also, when we started out saying, well, hard science fiction and comedy, they don't really match. And yet in Eugenies Jeans, it sounds like you did manage to do that.
Yes, I did. That was extremely challenging. I was struggling for a few months, and I had several discussions with my screenwriting teacher at that time, trying to come up with the idea, but I could not change the science. If I want to participate in that, contest, I cannot change the science, and that was my goal for writing the script. So keeping the science intact, that's how I kind of came up with this idea that there is not much science in it, because the moment you go a little bit deeper into the science, you like, and if the science is actual real science, you cannot create comedy. The moment you're creating comedy, you are kind of giving an impression to the audience that it's simple stuff, or it's not real. Comedy gives you that kind of illusion, but you cannot do that with real science. Real science is where people are working, 10, 11 hours a day on the actual stuff.
I mean, I guess part of that is, it sounds like looking at different types of comedy, because there's slapstick comedy, there's really big comedy, and then there's just sort of comedy that happens naturally, or dramedy, that you have some comedy within the drama.
Right. In my script, Eugenies Jeans, what I tried to do, I kept the science pretty minimum. And the only thing I kept of the science is that this scientist is working on trying to link genes with criminal behavior. Okay, and there are some scenes where he actually gives a presentation. He talks about real science to the actual scientists, his peers and stuff, that this is what I have come up with, and that's real science based on whatever is available right now. He's like, I'm working on this particular gene and stuff, and that leads him to go and interview a real criminal and try and see if he can get some blood sample from her and do an analysis on her genes. From then onwards, the script completely launches into a different world, where he gets, swept into the criminal world of New York City, a gang member, and then that's where the whole thing goes into a different
sounds
direction.
like a lot of fun. Best of luck. Please keep us posted and let us know how you do in the competition. We'll cross our fingers.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm hoping they will select it, and so if they select my script, it will be made.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. Well, best of luck. Yes, keep us posted.
We're all crossing our fingers, and do let us know. We'd love to have you on again to talk some more. You've got so much to say, and both of these segments that we've talked I've learned so much, and it's so cool.
Thank you for inviting me, and to everybody, please do watch my film Junk DNA, and the link is right at the bottom, and also my YouTube channel, the link is right at the bottom. That has all my information if anybody wants to get hold of me. And as you know, I'm the guy who merges science and comedy, yoga and comedy, Indian culture and comedy. That's me.
I look forward to seeing you riding a cow doing yoga.
Me too.
Oh my God. That's my curry western. I don't know if the cow is doing yoga or my hero is doing yoga on the cow.
I'll figure it out. Yeah.
Yes.
So Elizabeth, what did you learn this week? That was exciting.
Well, I learned a bunch of stuff, but one of my favorites is that there's been, with farming, there's been a lot more developments in vertical farms where they're growing crops, up so they can do it in condensed spaces. And Taiwan is turning some underground unused metro stations into organic vertical farms. They're using hydroponic farms, and they grow lettuce under LED lights, so they don't need to use herbicides or pesticides. And there's one that's 40 square meters that has a full market where you can buy organic produce. And so I thought
Wow,
that was
that's
cool.
pretty
That's my
amazing.
best thing.
That is good. And mine's a little climate based too this week. So they're working on and trying to figure out if this will actually work. That wind turbines, it looks like not only can they help us, dramatically reduce the amounts of CO2 we put out and have clean energy, but the actual mechanism of the turbine helps to pull the CO2 down. So most human-made CO2 is pretty high up in the air, and it helps to pull it down where they are going to be able to remove it more easily. So they have some machines, and they're working on this. I think it's been proven a little, but they're working on developing it and seeing how well they can work to get more CO2 out of the atmosphere. So yay, wind.
Yay, wind. We've got a lot of people full of hot wind out there, so maybe we can just put up these turbines in our political centers.
Or in our long-wielding, long-lost friends, where we have
true. Pull some of that out.
What would you like to tell us about?
I learned this week that if in future it's ever we come up with a technology where we could maybe travel inside a black hole, whoever is traveling inside the black hole will not be out to tell us the experience, because the concept of black hole consumes the entire time and space, and the concept of time and space is very different than how we experience it on Earth. Inside a black hole, the time and space both freeze. There is no time, there is no space. So if you ever travel into it, you will remain there probably.
Right. Or right on the verge of it, right? Wasn't
right on the verge of it.
Right on the verge. So you're always like,
maybe you are frozen forever, for eternity.
Yeah. Anybody, by the way, I am going to add a link. There's a book called The Never Ending Days of Being Dead by English science writer who writes usually about quantum physics and stuff. And he's really, really good. I'll put a link.
Very cool. Well,
and we want to thank, of course, our fantastic producer, Maria Korolov, and our editor, Alex Korolov. Thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you.
We couldn't do it without them. And if you would like to support MetaStellar, the magazine, which is where we all come from, well, not really come from, but where this show comes from, you can visit our Patreon page, and there's a link below, and you can support us that way. And all the money that we collect goes to paying writers for their original fiction. And we produce horror, science fiction, and fantasy stories. And you can check us out online too to read the stories. So thank you so much, Koushik. It was really a delight.
Please support MetaStellar.
Thanks,
MetaStellar.
And thank you for being here, and thank you, audience, for joining us today. And we'll see you next time we get together.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you. Thanks. And
Thank
good luck.
you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.